All right, let's get straight into it. Today, we're breaking down the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. If you want to truly master the geopolitical, economic, and security dynamics of South Asia and the broader Indo-Pacific, understanding this corridor is absolutely essential. We've designed this as a high-density analytical explainer, specifically structured for serious retention and conceptual clarity. So let's dive in. Here is the analytical matrix we'll be using today. We're going to cover the core framework, the underlying strategic game, the Indian calculus, the geoeconomic friction slowing things down, the current recalibration, and finally, we'll wrap up with a memory vault for rapid revision.
Starting with Section 1, the core framework, focusing on physical geography and root causes. Fundamentally, we're looking at a 3,000-kilometer logistics corridor connecting Pakistan's deep water port of Gwadar straight up to Kashgar in China's Xinjiang province. It's a massive network of highways, railways, and energy pipelines. When it was initially planned, we saw a $46 billion pledge, but that investment has since ballooned to over $60 billion US dollars. That scale places CPEC right at the heart of China's transnational Belt and Road Initiative. Now, why is China doing this? The physical motivation is actually pretty straightforward when you look at the map. Historically, for China to access the Indian Ocean, they have to rely on a highly vulnerable 13,000-kilometer maritime route going all the way through the South China Sea and the Strait of Malacca. CPEC completely mitigates that. It provides a 2,000-kilometer overland shortcut from Gwadar straight into Kashgar. That spatial anchor is literally what drives this entire initiative.
Moving on to Section 2, the strategic game. Let's look at the stakeholders and their hidden motives. You know, public economic claims often mask much deeper geopolitical objectives. And this brings us to a concept you absolutely need to remember, the Malacca dilemma. This refers to China's severe strategic vulnerability because they rely so heavily on the Strait of Malacca for their energy imports. By developing Kashgar as a trade terminus, Beijing effectively bypasses that choke point entirely. Plus, landlocked Central Asian states are super eager to plug into this corridor. It gives them access to the Indian Ocean while simultaneously feeding China's massive energy demands.
If we break down the original 39 major CPEC projects, Beijing's immediate priorities become very clear. While the plan did include 9 special economic zones and 7 major transport links, a staggering 23 of those projects were dedicated solely to energy. The logic is simple. To operationalize a massive industrial corridor, you have to power it first. But beneath that economic surface, we find very distinct strategic motivations. For Pakistan, binding itself economically to China is a way to significantly increase its leverage against both the US and India. For China, it's all about Gwadar port's proximity to the Strait of Hormuz. Securing Gwadar establishes a potential Chinese naval presence right in the Arabian Sea, which perfectly complements their existing overseas military base in Djibouti. It's a massive step forward for their broader maritime security objectives. That brings us to Section 3, the Indian calculus. Let's examine their threat matrix and response. For India, this entire analysis revolves around territorial sovereignty and strategic autonomy. I want you to actively recall this specific geographical fact. CPEC passes directly through the Gilgit-Baltistan region. This is territory in Pakistan Occupied Kashmir that is legally claimed by India. So for New Delhi, this physical alignment isn't just an economic project. It constitutes a direct, unacceptable violation of its territorial sovereignty. Because of that core sovereignty violation, India's institutional response has been incredibly methodical. First, they've lodged formal, persistent objections. Second, they executed a deliberate state policy to boycott successive Belt and Road Initiative conferences. And third, they maintained strict, constant vigilance regarding the presence of the Chinese People's Liberation Army, who operate in Gilgit-Baltistan under the official pretext of Project Security. Furthermore, Indian strategists are heavily focused on the maritime threat matrix. Think about it. A militarized, deep-water port at Gwadar fundamentally alters the security environment of the entire region. It places potential Chinese naval assets mere hundreds of miles from India's western maritime flank, right next to some of the most critical global energy shipping lanes. And the security implications are so profound that Gwadar isn't just handled by standard police. During the tenure of former Army Chief General Raheel Sharif, the Pakistan Army actually raised a completely new dedicated military division exclusively to secure the CPEC route and the port itself. That heavily militarized posture really underscores the high-threat environment this economic project operates within.
Let's transition to Section 4, Geoeconomic Friction and the Current Slowdown.
If we fast forward from the grand optimism of 2015, CPEC has actually lost a lot of its critical momentum, and it's due to a cascade of interconnected crises. Repeated targeted security attacks on Chinese workers, particularly down in Balochistan, have forced a hyper-cautious approach. Compound that with Pakistan's internal political instability, frequent policy reversals, and a severe balance of payments crisis that brought down intense IMF pressure, and you have a recipe that has collectively crippled financial progress.
Contrasting that 2015 vision with today's reality perfectly illustrates this friction. The original plan promised rapid industrialization. They literally aimed to transform Gwadar into Pakistan's Dubai. But in reality, mega projects like the ML1 railway upgrade are severely delayed, and Gwadar is facing immense local discontent. Because of all this, China is now conducting a much broader reappraisal of BRI risks globally, and they've become incredibly cautious about issuing large state loans. So this forces an important analytical question. Is the flagship Belt and Road project actually failing to deliver on its transformational promises? Well, the sweeping 2015 vision is undoubtedly diluted. No question about it. But the project isn't dead. It's just evolving out of sheer geoeconomic necessity. Which brings us to Section 5, the recalibration, or what's being called CPEC 2.0. Both nations are actively attempting to salvage the corridor through a strategic recalibration. If you look at the trajectory, you see a major shift. We went from massive upfront $46 billion infrastructure pledges back in 2015 straight into the current stall, and now towards a newly projected 2025 landscape. Recent MOUs indicate fresh pledges of roughly $8.5 billion. That is a drastic reduction in scale, showing China is largely abandoning those heavy upfront infrastructure commitments. This pragmatic downscaling is what defines CPEC 2.0. The bilateral focus has deliberately shifted away from continent-spanning highways and pivoted toward commercially viable sectors, things like agriculture, mining, and highly specific industrial zones. It's a calculated retreat from the original grand vision, driven entirely by security realities on the ground and severe sovereign debt constraints. Finally, Section 6, the Memory Vault. Let's do a rapid revision recap. Let's lock in the hard data so you have this ready to go. On macrogeography and economics, CPEC is a 3,000-kilometer route connecting Gwadar to Kashgar. It represents over $60 billion in pledged investment. Its absolute primary geopolitical function is solving China's Malacca dilemma. And it launched with 39 initial megaprojects overwhelmingly skewed toward energy generation. On strategy and security. The physical route directly violates India's sovereignty in Gilgit-Baltistan, which resulted in New Delhi's strict boycott of all BRI initiatives. Militarily, it provides potential Arabian Sea access for the PLA Navy. Economically, that initial grand vision has been heavily stalled by Balochistan security risks and intense IMF pressures, forcing both nations into a pragmatic shift toward a scaled-down CPEC 2.0. So, as the grand, sweeping infrastructure dreams of CPEC downsize into the heavily guarded, highly pragmatic investments of 2.0, a final provocative strategic question remains: will China's relentless quest for Arabian Sea access ultimately compromise Pakistan's long-term economic sovereignty? Keep that specific geoeconomic reality right at the front of your mind as you continue your analysis of the Indo-Pacific region.